Welcome back, humor consumers, to the Life Happens, Laugh Anyway podcast. I'm comedian Tracy DeGraff.
And I'm Cathrine, co-host and bestie.
Well, welcome back to the Pod Lab, Cathrine. Here we are, episode 136.
Yeah.
Can you
Pretty
believe
good.
it?
Well, yes and no.
Yeah. It seems like it's gone fast, though. Like, I know we started this a while back,
Yeah.
but it does feel like it's going by fast. If you're brand new and you've just stumbled upon us, welcome aboard. We're just a couple of besties that pick a topic for every week that we think you'll care about. We hope you care about it. We care.
We're doing it anyway.
We are, whether you like it or not. So we do this, and we started this during the pandemic, and it's just kept going, and hopefully it'll keep going forever. I don't know. Forever's a long time. We have sponsors of the podcast. Tell our friends, Cathrine, about our sponsors.
We have some wonderful sponsors that contribute $5 a month.
That's right.
Yes, and they don't even have to do anything. Just one time and click on the website or the email that they get. It's super simple. And then it just is automatically deducted every month. There's a couple of them that gave 1 month sum, and that just helps us to move forward.
It absolutely does. So we thank you to all of our sponsors. We have about 14 sponsors right now. So we thank you all for your contribution. You have now become humor contributors.
Right.
You've crossed over from consumer to contributor. So we appreciate that. And if you love to listen to this podcast, but you're not contributing, shame on you.
Here it comes.
Here it comes. We ask you to prayerfully consider supporting the podcast, because Cathrine and I do have some big dreams and goals. We were just talking about whether or not we're going to go to PodFest, which is a podcasting conference coming up in January of 2024, and it's in Orlando, Florida.
Right.
And we are in the Chicago area. So there are some costs related to going to the podcast in terms of travel and hotel and the cost of the conference. And so your contributions can help us to get better at this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or even if you don't pray on it, you just go by instinct. Do that.
Yeah, do it.
If your gut says, I'm going to do it. These two, they inspire me.
Right. Here's how I look at it.
Don't pray, because then God might say no.
No, he's not going to say no. He's going to say yes, definitely.
Yeah.
The way I look at it with content support is, if you enjoy the content and you would be sad if it went away, support it.
Yeah.
Support it.
Right.
So, all right. Well, today's topic, friends, is Mercury 13. And maybe you've heard of it and maybe you haven't. I got to be honest, when I first heard the title, I immediately thought of those little mercury thermometers,
Yeah, right.
from back in the day. So I wasn't sure if somebody had poisoning or something,
Yeah.
But that's not it at all. So Mercury 13 is the topic, and it's a documentary. And we're going to talk about what it is, what it's all about, and it's about women. So we're going to go into their story and how they've impacted the world, really.
Yeah.
And we always have a takeaway in terms of a call to action. So at the end of the podcast, we're going to encourage you to be inspired and to do something about what you're about to listen to.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah. So pull your big pants up and buckle in, buckaroos. Here we go. And of course, we always have an inspirational close, so stay tuned for that. All right, Cathrine, if you are a Martian, you just arrived on Earth, and you've got to explain, what is Mercury 13? What would you hear?
A group of women but they were pilots that passed a battery of tests that was put on by the Lovelace Clinic, and we'll get into that further on down the line, that was not at all a part of NASA. And they passed these battery of tests to become astronauts. And they called themselves the Mercury 13, I think based on the fact that the men were the Mercury 7.
Okay. Yes.
But they were also called FLAT, which was First Lady Astronaut Trainees.
Okay.
Yeah, so they were known as that as
Didn't
well.
have anything to do with their...
Right. I don't know.
Okay. Now, this was in the early 60s. All right. So
Right.
these women were sort of pioneers, if you want to
Yeah.
call it that, because there weren't that many women that were flying planes back then in the 60s.
Well, there were a lot more than I thought.
Yeah.
Internationally, there were, I couldn't believe it, actually. There were a lot. But these aggressive women, I guess you could say. They were the best of the best. They broke records that men didn't even break. They were some of them were doing these for jobs and things like that. So
yeah. Not your conventional coming out of the 1950s with the pearls and the heels and the little skirts and stuff and
right.
Beaver cleaver.
Although it's funny because they were flying these planes, not all the time, but I think later on, I think it was after this program, and they would have to fly in their dresses with their pearl-looking necklaces. I don't know if they were real, but yeah, and heels.
Yeah.
It was crazy.
I think they did that for the cameras, for the publicity. Because
I think the men probably wanted them to do that.
I'm sure that they did.
Mm-hmm.
And the women went along to get along. Whether or not they enjoyed wearing all that garb while they're piloting a plane, I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe they were like, oh, this is great. I always wear heels when I'm flying a plane. So
yeah,
it's just interesting to me as a woman myself that we're kind of pigeonholed many times.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people are.
Yeah.
Whether men or women, but whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so group of women, 13 women obviously, who have been selected to be given this battery of tests to find out how would they stack up against the men if they were to become astronauts.
Right. And so the backstory on that is that there was this program by Lovelace, Dr. Lovelace, and he was a aerospace medicine guy, and he was the director of this particular program that would test the astronauts to be in the race to beat Russia up into space. And so these tests were just basically tests. They didn't know what to expect in space exactly. So they had crazy physical, psychological tests and things such as that. So there were 7 men that passed it, and then Lovelace, he attends this conference in Russia, and he learns that Russia is planning on putting a woman into space. And so he thinks about that. So then he gets his good friend, Jackie Cochran. And she is a outstanding pilot. She flew jets. Now, this was one of the requirements that one would have to be an astronaut. She flew jets. She broke speed and distance records. She funded the testing that Lovelace, then started on testing these women. And she even paid for the expenses of this third phase of tests that these women were going to have to go through. And she headed up, back in the World War II, the WASP, which was Women Air Force Service Pilots.
Okay.
I think that's what it was called. And she broke a sound barrier.
Wow.
So she had all these accolades. So she helped funded this. I think she's older than these. Actually, I know she is.
Yeah.
Than these women too. So then also somewhere around that same time, this Lovelace, he meets this Jerry Cobb. Now, Jerry Cobb was a very accomplished pilot as well. And he meets her at an Air Force conference or get together. So that was good fortune for both of them. And she's the first person that he recruits into these tests. And she right away says yes. So then he asks Jackie to get these other women. So I think there were 25 women that were selected to take these tests. And thousands had applied, which amazed me because, again, you wouldn't think there would be that many women pilots, but there were more than I thought.
Yeah. And notable that, I know you already said it, that NASA did not sponsor this testing.
No, they didn't even know about it.
So it was not sanctioned by the United States government. It was strictly the curiosity of these two individuals who wanted to know, Dr. Lovelace and the woman, what was her name again?
Jackie Cochran.
Okay, so Dr. Lovelace and Jackie Cochran just had this curiosity. Like, we wonder, would the women test as well as the men? And by test, I mean, like Catherine said, there were all kinds of weird, wonky physical tests that they had to do and mental ability tests and things like that. And there was one test where they had to squirt something in their ear that was like really cold. And they had to get their reaction to it because you do have to stay calm under pressure, obviously, if you're an astronaut. Like when they say, Houston, we have a problem. They weren't like,
yeah. Right. You can't be a mess.
You can't be a raving lunatic. That's why I could never be an astronaut. But what I found very interesting about the results of these tests is that the women fared better than the men.
Yes, they did. Well, in many of the categories, they did. They didn't complain like the men did.
Yeah, hello.
The men got restless. And then there were several men that were interviewed in 2 different things that I had watched. And they had said that they believed that women could tolerate pain much more than men can anyway. And it proved to be true. And when I was thinking about this, now this wasn't pointed out in the documentaries, but I'm like, only 7 men passed, but 13 women did?
Well,
so I don't
that
know
just
if
might be a matter of they needed 7 to do the mission that they were preparing for.
Yeah, I thought about that too, but still.
Okay, the thing that I thought of when I learned that the women fared so well in the testing and actually did better than the men in many cases, I thought about our little podcast that we did on the Donner Party.
I did too.
Yes.
I thought about that too, how the women survived.
Right.
And
So
and the men went nuts.
Yeah, they lost it mentally. They
Gave
lost
up.
it emotionally. They died.
Yeah, they gave up.
Physically, they lost. And the women, and it was said that the women had that extra grit because they knew if they died, their babies were going to die.
Yeah.
And that was the thing that this one woman, like she was hovered over her baby, like just trying to keep her baby warm and keep the baby alive. And, you know.
Well, they also, in that study with the Donner women, it was also, some of them survived that didn't even have kids left. And so they don't know. And it wasn't anything to do with women's fat, because that was one thing that they tried to say, but that was dispelled as well. So.
Yeah. So if you're looking for another fun listen, go back into the archives of our podcast here and find the Donner Party podcast.
Yeah.
All right. So they did these tests and they found out that the women, you know, they could hold their own. They could do their thing.
That's right.
So then what happened?
And they proved themselves. So then they go on. Now, in between this, I think Russia has already taken off and shocked the world with that. And so the race is on even more now. And then I think a month later, then Alan Shepard went up into space for the United States, but it was a sub-orbit, and he was only up there 15 minutes. It basically was not near as phenomenal as Russia. So meanwhile, the women are saying, use us. We could do this. We could be, why aren't we up there too? And they were real advocates to get up there in space. So they move on to the second phase of this testing, and this time it was psychological. First time physical, second time psychological. They're in these weird water bath things.
Mm-hmm.
And this is another test where the men just felt like their skin was crawling and they couldn't stand it, where the women lasted in there for hours. And that Jerry Cobb, she broke a record of like 9.5 hours just laying there floating in
and
this
she
water.
said it was like she fell asleep and she was like calm and relaxed.
Right. A couple of the women, their explanation was, my schedule and and everything was so rigorous before this that they were glad to just lay there. That's how they looked at it.
I liked the comment of the one who had did she have 8 kids?
Yeah, I was going to get to that. Right. Yeah.
Well, and some news reporter said, well, how can you manage 8 kids and be an astronaut? And she said, well, I would like to get away from them sometimes, or something like that.
She said, if you had 8 kids, you'd want to go to the moon too.
Yeah.
Something like that.
I can relate to that one.
Yeah.
All right, what else?
To go to Dubai. What else? Well, then the third phase was all set up. Jackie Cochran, she funded it. She even paid for the expenses for these women to get down to Pensacola, Florida. That was going to be the third phase. And that one was where they got to test pilot the jets. And that was one of the requirements. They had crazy requirements. I can't even remember all of them, but it was impossible for women to do it because to become astronauts because of these requirements. And one of them was to be test pilot for jets.
Right, because they didn't allow women to test pilot the jets.
And you had to be military.
Mm-hmm.
But they wouldn't allow women to be in the military. So there was no way. Okay. Well, they get this opportunity. Pensacola, the aircraft people down there said, yeah, bring them. NASA got wind of it, and they shut it down. So Lovelace had to write a letter to Cobb She then tells everybody else this is not going to happen. And they were sorely disappointed.
I'm sure.
Right. But Cobb just kept fighting for the right to be able to serve in the same way that the men were, and the same opportunities, and that they had the same qualifications. I think one of the qualifications was you had to be an engineer. Well, Cobb was an engineer. A couple of them were. She made some really good arguments, which I got to look that up in a second. Then Lyndon B. Johnson, he then said that not only did he write this letter that this has got to be shut down, he was in agreement when NASA said this is going to be shut down, but he hand wrote on the letter, this must stop now, with his own handwriting, and then signed it. And so it was a real slap in the face.
You know what's aggravating about that is there's no reason other than they didn't want these women to excel.
They didn't. Men were complaining that their jobs were being taken. You know, there's some what's the word I want to say? Innuendos.
Yeah.
That not only were they taking their jobs, but that they were better than them in some cases.
That's what's aggravating.
Yeah.
Is because, all right, it would be one thing if the testing showed that the women were far inferior to these men.
Yes.
You know, you cannot deny that a physical man is different.
Yeah, right.
So it would be different if it took a certain amount of strength or a certain height or a certain anything.
Yeah.
But because it didn't, and because the women tested better than the men in so many cases, and they proved themselves scientifically, not just in theory.
Right.
I'm getting excited.
I know, right.
But that's what's aggravating about these things that hold women back or hold anybody back. Why not just look for the best qualified individuals, whether men or women? Look for the best qualified individuals. Put them all through the rigor. Put them all through the test. Let them compete against one another equally. Put them on equal footing. And the best man or woman wins.
Right. And that was part of the argument that they had. Yeah. Let the best human go up in space.
Right.
The best humans. It doesn't have to be man or woman. That's what Cobb said. Also, I want to point out that in the war effort, 38 women that were serving. Now, they were serving in the military. So that's another thing, because that was a requirement. But they weren't really recognized. They were recognized, but they weren't.
Well, they weren't fighter pilots like these guys.
They weren't fighter pilots, but they were flying those airplanes from the
ferrying
field.
Them. They were delivering the airplanes to the battlefield.
Right, exactly. And 38 women pilots died by accidents, and years later it was revealed that some had been sabotaged, and they're not quite sure who.
Okay. All right. So now let's not just skip over that, because that's pretty massive.
Yeah.
These women were sabotaged. Their planes were sabotaged. That means they were murdered.
Yeah.
They were intentionally killed because why?
Because of egos.
Yeah.
Right.
I think that is it holds back society, and it holds back our culture when we go to those depths of, I hate you so much. I'm just going to wipe you off this earth because I can't stand for you to be better than me.
Yeah. That's
horrible.
Terrible. Right. That's not the last we see of the egos, and we'll get to that. There's some betrayal coming up.
One more thing. While I'm still on my rampage. You and I talked about this yesterday just a little bit in regards to, okay, well, no wonder the women did well with those, like just gutting it out and holding on until it was over with the testing. We have the babies.
Right.
We have the babies. We know how to breathe and hold on. And, you feel like your whole body's turning inside out when you're having a baby.
Yeah.
And you going to say, I quit?
Right. No chance.
You're not going to quit. That baby's coming whether you want it or not. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I'm sorry.
No.
This is so aggravating.
I know. Well, now after it's shut down, like I said, Cobb and Hart, they give their arguments up in Washington, and they happen to be able to get this hearing because Janie Hart, her husband was a senator or something like that, so they were able to be heard. She opens up the statement with the story about 100 years prior to this ago. women weren't even allowed to serve in the medic field in war because they were considered frail and emotional structure that would never withstand the horrors of bandaging somebody up. Then they later changed it to, well, now you can if you're middle-aged and ugly. Because they even said this, it's documented, ugly women have probably have more strength in character.
Yeah,
it's character.
It just,
I had to make sure that was right, and it is.
blows my mind.
I know.
If you're middle-aged and ugly,
and
then you come on over here.
And then, can you imagine selecting you're ugly? You're borderline.
You could be cute, but no, you're ugly.
Oh yeah, you've got that, that tooth sticking out. I think you're ugly. So much for beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Yeah.
I want to know who's in the meeting, right? What are we going to do about this? These women, how are we going to get them to shut up? I know what we should do. Let's tell them they can do it only if they're ugly. Right. Then let's see who wants to sign up.
Yeah. Ugly women can handle gore better because they're closer to it. They're just ugly. They look at themselves in the mirror and they're like, yeah, that's a horror. Gee, I think I should be able to look at a bandage, an open wound because I'm so ugly.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
I mean, just that somebody would even think of that.
I know. And now 100 years later, and Lyndon B. Johnson, the president of the United States, says, yeah, women can't go up into space because they have their periods.
Okay.
Yeah. So the daughter of Jamie Hart, is it Jamie? No, Janie Hart. Mm-hmm. The one that was arguing in Washington, her grown daughter in this interview in the documentary, she says, I wish they had, it was Lovelace's daughter. And she said, I wish that it had said on the tampon boxes, women have periods, but they can fly too. Yeah.
Oh, mercy.
Yeah. So really insulting things were said. One of the astronauts was asked the question, do you think that women, and it wasn't John Glenn, because he made some real chauvinistic remarks, and people really valued his opinion. So he was one of them that caused it to shut down, they say. But another astronaut, when he was asked the opinion, do you think that women should go up in space? And he's like, well, yeah, we could have used the women in the second run instead of the chimpanzee.
Yeah, and then everybody laughed at that.
Yeah,
like it was funny.
I know, and I couldn't tell if he meant it to be funny. It didn't seem like it, because he kind of shifted his eyes and head like, oh, why are people laughing? But I don't know.
Okay, I think that comment and the fact that the room burst into laughter with that comment is very telling.
I do, right.
Of the temperature of the culture
exactly
at that time.
Exactly.
Because they did the testing on animals because they had lesser value than a human life. Mm-hmm. And so that man was saying that women have a lesser value than a man.
Right.
Oh, don't get me started,
Catherine.
I know. I'm coming out. Ron's going to get home and go, what'd you do?
I was thinking of certain things that we've talked about,
Oh, right.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, right,
yeah.
Right.
So,
anywho, okay.
Yeah.
I need a drink.
Oh, Betsy.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, so basically, this program was shut down, and American women did not go up into space until 20 years later. And even then, so in between that, Russia did put a woman up into space, and guess what? Her profession
wasn't she like an acrobat or something, or some kind of carnival lady?
Well, she did do, as a sport, she did parachute something, balloon parachuting, something like that. But her job or career was a textile factory worker.
Okay.
Nothing to do with space.
Okay. You know what they did? They just said, yo, over here.
I know.
Wait, that sounded more Japanese than it did Russian.
It sounded, German.
Okay. They just strapped her in and shot her up there.
That's right.
And the whole time she was crapping her pants. That's what happened.
Well, and Russia was like, hey, we beat you. Again.
Right.
again. Now, the next time, the first time an American woman goes up, she's not piloting or anything like that. I don't even think she was a mission specialist. But she went up. I don't want to discredit her. I mean, that takes a lot of whatever, not only courage and all the stuff, but all the degrees and knowledge that she had too.
Well, it takes incredible discipline.
Yeah.
It takes brains. You have to be a scientist. You have to be in incredible shape.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And stamina. Oh, so many things.
Right. Well, I guess I'm pointing it out because still, again, a woman wasn't able to pilot, even though they were perfectly qualified. From what I understand, even in the later 80s, the same qualifications they had in 1959 still existed in the 80s for women to become astronauts. And now toward the end of this documentary, we shift toward they're interviewing Eileen Collins. And Eileen Collins, she was from Elmira, New York, and she had, as a child, lived near some museum. National Soaring Museum. So she was inspired by that. And she never thought of herself as not being able to do something because she wasn't a man, but rather she was like, well, I could do that. I could fly. And she didn't tell anyone she wanted to be an astronaut because she didn't want anyone to tell her she couldn't. Yeah. So at some point she must have, though, because one day she's out flying and she gets back in. And she has a note to call the squadron. Well, she gets back into the squadron, and she has a note to call this astronaut down at NASA. And he says, hey, first thing he says, you still want to be an astronaut? She says, yes. She, at some point, says to him, now, am I going to be a mission specialist, or am I going to be a pilot? He said, you're going to be the first American pilot. I think she was the first ever woman pilot to pilot a rocket. When she was given like this speech in front of, President Clinton and Hillary and all the people, she gave credit to those 13 women. So that's how these women paved the way. And she said, I wouldn't be here today if the Mercury 13 hadn't done what they did. Then at her launch, she invited them to come to the launch. And NASA found out, and they struck them from her list and put them on their VIP list. And so they got to go. And these women said that they will never forget the applause that they got from all the other astronauts that were there and the recognition. And it meant a lot to them to have that. And all those women, those 13 women, they went on to have just really phenomenal careers. They flew into their old age. They some of them were mechanics, and some of them flew for commercial reasons or whatever. I can't remember all of them, but to summarize it, they made an impact, quite a bit.
I think there's a good lesson for us to take away from what you just shared, that their failure, in essence, they failed forward. So while the program was denied, and they were not able to do what the dream was, what they thought was the pinnacle of their career, but they went forward. They moved the needle. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that can be devastating for people to not achieve what they feel they had in their mind that they were going to do. Mm-hmm. But we have to look at it from the perspective of, what is God doing in our lives? Mm-hmm. I really believe that. What is happening around us that we don't know about? And what impact are we having just by keeping the attitude of, I'm not going to give up. I'm not going to let you define who I am. I'm not going to just lay down here and take it.
Yeah, right.
I'm going to speak up. Mm-hmm. You're going to hear from me. I'm going to put my pearls on and my heels. Might put one through your head. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm proud of those women that they did that. Yeah. And I hope that others will just keep on keeping on.
Yeah. I was proud of the responses that they would get in interviews back in the 60s, like that Janie Cobb. Gosh, their names are all so similar. When she was asked by a male interviewer, well, don't you want to be married? Wouldn't you rather, basically was asking her to do kitchen stuff. And she said, oh, no, I want to do this just like anyone else. Then he says, well, does that mean you're afraid of men? And she says, no, and she just had such dignity,
Yeah.
And she said, no, I wouldn't say that. Those are the kinds of things that were being said.
It just
And like
shows
you said,
the
the
stupidity of the reporter who would ask that question. Are you afraid of man? Is that why you're going up an astronaut in this space?
Yeah.
No.
It's just, yeah.
I really loved, what was the lady's name? Wally something?
Yeah, Funk.
Yeah. I loved what her parents instilled in her as a young child.
Yeah.
They raised her with like a blank check mindset.
Mm-hmm.
You have a blank check.
Mm-hmm.
You can write on it whatever you want. You can be whatever you want to be,
Yeah.
And she never felt limited by her gender.
Right.
She did not feel like being a woman was a negative or a bad thing or held her down.
Right. Like she didn't have limitations.
Yeah.
Right.
And she equated it with freedom.
She did. She was fun to watch in the interview because
I agree.
Yeah, she was like, oh, I just loved the first time I went up in a plane. I smelled that jet fuel and I felt the freedom. She taught herself acrobatics in the air. She bought herself a plane after going through all this thing with, it's not really NASA, but the testing and so forth. Bought herself a plane, taught herself how to do acrobatics in the sky, and she was something else.
Yeah, I would encourage anyone who wants to be inspired to watch this documentary, Mercury 13. Just watch it. It's on Netflix. Or you can go on YouTube and watch some, supplemental material about it. You can see her interviewed.
I watched another one called, what was it called? Oh, In Search of History. Mercury 13, The Secret Astronauts. That's what it was called. It was a good one.
Yeah. Obviously, when we bring this kind of content to the table, it can just be the beginning of a conversation that you might have with this material.
Yeah.
You might just go down the rabbit trails and go, you know what? I got to find out what these women did and dig further into it.
Okay.
I think it's interesting.
Speaking of rabbit trail.
Yes.
All right. So do you recall, I think her name was Lisa Newark?
Do I recall Lisa Newark?
The diaper astronaut?
Oh, wait, that she murdered somebody?
Yeah. Well, no, she didn't murder. She attacked. Okay, so now this is an exception.
Kind of a love triangle or something?
Yes, it was a love triangle. And I think it was in 2007. And she was in a love triangle with a fellow astronaut. And she was married and he was married.
Oh.
Then he says to her, I'm moving on. And she was really upset about that. And she broke into his apartment, read all of his emails in communication with his new love. So she decided she was going to drive from, I think, Texas to Orlando. I know it's to Orlando, but it was far, like 900 miles. And so when she gets to this airport, because she knows exactly when this woman is going to be flying in because she read the emails, she asks her for help or a ride or something. The woman was sus. She was like, okay, she stands out. She's all covered up and incognito. I can tell something's wrong here. But she didn't really know who she was. So this astronaut, Newark, she tries to attack her. She had on her some pepper spray, a knife, and something else. And there were diapers found in the car. Her lawyer then said, when the case went to court, well, now, those diapers were from the hurricane evacuation in 2005.
Right.
This is in 2007.
Okay.
So women are capable, everybody. But this, people in general have their limits. They say that she was super stressed by whatever.
Obviously,
Whatever.
she had problems.
Yeah.
All right. Well, don't do what she did.
That was a rabbit trail I went down. Like,
It was.
Yeah, I remember that.
You watch a lot of 48 Hours.
Well, this was just while I was doing my research.
Oh, you found it while you were researching this?
Yeah.
Just because you must have Googled female astronaut or something?
I came across the diaper astronaut or something like that. I'm like,
what's that?
That sounds familiar. I remember that.
Oh, Lord, we're in big trouble. All right, let's get to do you have anything else to share on this documentary? Because I want to get to our scripture.
No.
Okay. We always close well, first let's do our call to action, then we'll do our scripture.
Yeah.
Call to action, I feel like what we can take away from this, like when I was watching these women and listening to their story, I was not motivated in the slightest to become an astronaut, obviously at 57, but I never would want to do that. That's not something I would ever aspire to do. Fly a plane. You'll barely get in a plane.
I know. But it's just inspiring in general.
Right. And that's I think what the call to action can be for us is to figure out what you do love to do and go and do it.
Yeah.
What is holding you back?
Right.
Is it because you're a woman? Is it your gender? Or maybe there's a man listening and thinks, I can't become this because I'm a man. Well, figure out what you really love to do and start doing that.
Yeah. Really good advice. You mentioned I think it was Wally Funk that said that her parents said you could do anything. One of the women, one of the 13 women, her parents, they just forbade her to fly, to do, any of that. So she had to move and sneak behind their backs to do what she knew she could do. And in these interviews, she said, I was just as good of a flyer as Cobb and Cochran and those other women. She was something. Yeah. I admired her too.
All right. Well, that's a good note to end on. All right. So we have a little scripture here from Genesis chapter 1, verse 27. It says, so God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female. He created them. And basically, friends, we know from that scripture that God created human beings equally.
Right.
We know that he created them beautifully.
Right.
I mean, they are different, but equal.
Right.
And created in the image of God. And God said it is very good.
Yes, he did.
It's very good.
Very
All right.
simple.
Well, this was fun. And thanks for hanging in there with us and tuning in. And we invite you back next week.
Yeah. What are we doing next week?
I don't know.
Do we even know?
I got to look it up. I don't know. But you've been listening to the Life Happens, Laugh Anyway podcast. And I'm still comedian Tracy DeGraff.
I'm still Catherine.
See you next time.
Goodbye.